The influence of relative bodybuilding success, acting as constant proof of work whenever exposed to own image. Now, I am using the word bodybuilding here, but what I'm actually referring to is not the bodybuilding as usually the word refers to what this actually is, but I would use it in a broader sense, in the sense of trying to build and maintain the body, and with the body being kind of the house in which the mind is housed. This is the ultimate house, one could say. Without this, if you decrease my health of the body to 10%, then my mind is basically not the same. I at least assume that this would be the case. If you turn me from one moment to the next into a 100-year-old version of me, then I'm probably just not really me any longer, because my body no longer can create the mind. Now, I am therefore using bodybuilding similarly to house building to a certain extent, if I take these two analogies and combine them. And I would then use maintenance of the house and also trying to optimize the house. So maybe you start out with a small house, but you actually do realize that the house has potential, and you still have a little bit of basically square meters around the house. So you eventually build a garage, and then you're trying to improve the roof. You install solar tiles because it's now, this might be useful. And so you try to also improve upon the things you are given. That's what I'm trying to say. Now, the acting as a constant proof of work. When you then do this, similarly to how every time a family, for example, or a friend visits your house, it's like, not show, but look at all the things I have done. It's like a show. It's like a show off of, okay, this is the house, and I am able to maintain this house, and I do have that much worth, such that worth. So basically, my time multiplied by my wage, or whatever I am. If I'm not employed, maybe something else, but then you could also calculate the wage, then is kind of converted into money, and I'm using part of this money in order to do the renovations, but I'm also maybe doing some of these renovations myself. Therefore, I am also valuable, at least in terms of renovating my house. So I also have skill. So therefore, look at my house, look at me, basically as the house, as a reflection of past work I have built. Now, this is the house, but the body, to a certain extent, seems to be acting kind of in the same way. There also seem to be many biases which might reflect this, but one could also argue that a certain amount, or to a certain extent, these biases actually, similarly to the house, you take a look at the house of a person, and you can also tell how much time they invested into the house, and how well that they managed their life. Do they manage to have high quality sleep, or do they manage to have also children additionally, and have all of these things combined? So do they have the computational power to manage all of these things and to allocate the resources they have in a way that over time this house also doesn't degrade, and so on and so forth. And the same could be also said for the body. So to a certain extent, effects like the halo effect, even though partially at least seemingly created by genetics and by maybe superior genetics, but if then one just assumes the genetics to be fixed, and whatever the effect of genetics is on basically one can do, within what one can do then, if one maximizes this over time, and for example goes to the gym as just one avenue of bodybuilding in terms of the house building, then if one does this consistently, now of course one could do this not consistently, and therefore also have maybe a body that would be representative, at least seemingly representative, of being a proof of work, not representative, but representative of the hours that have been put in of past work basically, and would have this body that is just because, or mostly because of genetics, where somebody else would have to put in way more work, but still at the same absolute level, one could say. Now, in order to bypass this problem of, okay, there could be somebody who has a body that is similar to one that another person had to work for years for, one could bypass this by taking basically the first derivative of work or whatever input is, and saying, okay, but if we take a look at this over time, and we therefore take the slope of this, the first derivative, and say, okay, is this person improving, instead of what is the absolute level of the person, which also might to a certain extent explain why so many stories are based on loser to winner, because then we have basically the first derivative, the slope of the change, or the change might already be the slope of the relative levels. The change might already be the change, but if one takes the first derivative of whatever input one has, then one converts basically the absolute levels into relative levels, and then this would allow ourselves to judge whether a person is developing by basically having this change represented in a rate of change or an incline in terms of the 3D representation of this. Now, if one then has a proof of work, let's just say, okay, you're going to the gym repeatedly, and you also additionally manage your diet, even though one could argue the nutritional environment becomes increasingly hostile. One could also say that if one is able to withstand these increasing forces of nutritional hostility, that then this also again acts as kind of a proof of superiority, at least, or as a proof of, it could be a proof of superiority of genes, for example, that are able to withstand this food environment better compared to others. But then this again would be out of the realm of what one can do, so out of the realm of one's possibility, but more in the realm of the variables one cannot control. But now, of course, this has many attack vectors, one could say, but at the same time, but there is also some truth to it, and I now want to discuss this truth to it. Let's take going to the gym, let's take diet, let's take exercise, and how all of these interplay. If you go to the gym repeatedly, but you can't manage to get your daily schedule properly aligned, and then you eat late, and then you sleep less qualitatively compared to the version of you that might have run a computation, which then resulted in a better allocation of your time and a better sequence of the things you're doing in a given day, and this resulted then in a better sleep, then this person might be better the person then has at least an advantage. I mean, at least in this specific regard. So, and of course there might be other variables, like age, like if a 70-year-old has the body of a 20-year-old and posts images on social media where he is still going strong, then this also might be basically the associated cost, or the assumed cost, the presumed cost, or the presumed time investment, or whatever the input is probably then higher. And maybe also the attributed agency is also then higher in somebody who had to withstand more circumstances, but this is also then visible in the representation. But now, kind of excluding all of these variables that possibly pollute this as a link that would make sense, one could say that if oneself invests time into these areas, then the body is kind of the result, the representation, similar to the house, that then acts as the representation of all the work one has put in. Therefore, the body acts kind of as a constant proof of work. And the body, because it is the thing that we use to interact with the world, and also can be seen in mirrors, therefore has kind of the potential to remind yourself, to basically act as a constant proof of work for oneself, even though, of course, superior genetics or other variables that basically pollute this link otherwise. But if one is able to do this, again, factoring in all of the other variables, then over time, at least for oneself, one can say, okay, I built this body. I am able to maintain this body, and this is the one thing. But the other thing where one could draw similar kind of conclusions would be, okay, I did work on this project, and I worked on this project, and I have this certificate, and I did this once, and I did this once. But these are all just things that are in our head and could be forgotten. They also could be recorded by our pictures, but then when is the right time to then pull this out? And then also the question is, what is the impact basically of dopamine? And if you then basically just dwelge, I think is the right word, or something like this. Basically, if you just say, oh, let's take a look at all the trophies I already collected in the past, then you might already be on the decline in terms of what you're currently doing. So the rate of change might slow down or go basically into the negative, or the change now might be negative because you are now spending time compared to before where you were constantly improving. So the improving rate is maybe dropping. And so therefore, maybe the body is the one unique item we have that is actually allowing to be kind of a continuous proof of work, similarly to how in crypto there is the proof of stake, the proof of work. And actually this idea is partially from from Balaji Srinivasan, who also made this connection between in crypto you might have proof of stake, proof of work, but in terms of health you also might continue basically to have proof of work. Now, if somebody therefore has maybe above average body that also happens to be at least to some extent linked with bigger whatever was the input. Maybe it was actually more effort spent on this, but the question is then what this effort was taken away from, and whether this person was able to take effort or to pour effort into this because they grew up in a more privileged environment. Maybe they had parents that were above financially able, so therefore the kid was able to pour more resources into this, and therefore the result is also again just not something that is actually a true signal, but is much more actually caused by something else or allowed by something else. But nonetheless, one could to a certain extent at least see this, and the representation it gives, and with it being the body as kind of this continuous proof of work thing that is also happening in the real world, and we can also visually access.